Welcome to the NFL Legends Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I am your host for the NFL Legends Show, Mike Goodpaster, and our guest today played for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, won a national championship in 1970, then went on to play for the Chicago Bears and later on the Seattle Seahawks, also played a little bit in the USFL. Help me welcome to the show, offensive lineman Bob Newton. How you doing, Bob?
Very well, Mike. Happy to be on your show and to touch base with you.
Yeah, always like talking to guys that played back in the 60s, 70s. It's when I grew up, and I think that's when the NFL was at its best. But let's just start from the beginning. When did you first start playing football?
Well, I first went out for organized football my sophomore year in high school. But my passion for football began a few years before that. Every Saturday I used to go down to the local park and watch the Pop Warner players play, the teams play. And at that time I was overweight. I couldn't meet the weight class for my age. But my passion for football began at that time. And then I finally went out. I went out for football my sophomore year in high school because basically I was going astray. I was flunking out. I was missing a lot of school, had a lot of family problems, and the athletic director in high school there one day said, "Hey, you got pretty good size. You ever thought about going out for football?" And I just kind of brushed it off. But the next day I was out there, and from that time on, I played for the next 18 or 19 years of my life.
Yeah.
So
when you look at it and you look back on it and you say how you did this to kind of help straighten you out a little bit, was there anybody in high school there while you were playing, a coach or anything, that had a big influence on your life?
Yeah, my head coach, his name was Ray Mishagan, and he had a huge impact on me. And the assistant line coach there, Art Jessup, and I had some great teammates, a guy named John Kramer, and another teammate was Mike Campanelli and Jerry Miller, a lot of high school, Harry Hartley, a lot of guys that I played in high school became very good, close friends. And but it really straightened me, and I know that youth football and high school football is dwindling right now, but I can't overstate that high school football saved me from a disastrous adolescent a period in my life. It got me straightened out and gave me focus, gave me another family, as far as the coaches and the teammates. So I can't speak high enough about high school football.
Yeah, because a good father or a good head coach is almost like a second father, or for some kids, a first father.
Yeah, you're right, Mike. And they are father figures. So what they say and do, those coaches have a huge impact on young people. And I've worked with a lot of coaches over the years with substance use, teaching young coaches, high school coaches, college coaches, how to intervene on substance use problems on their teams. And because I think they have a very great opportunity to do that. And but a lot of coaches that I've seen over the decades that I've been doing this work is, they'll ignore the problem, especially if it's a star player of the team, and then it sends such a mixed message to the other kids on the team, and that's how it breeds. That's how it breeds, and it actually fragments the team, because you got part of the team drinking, using other drugs, marijuana, and so forth, and then one team trying to go by the team, or one section of the team trying to go by the rules and not drink, and another group kind of in between. So it kind of fragments the team. So if you got a coach sending a mixed message, it makes it worse.
Yeah, and I think I coach my son's high school team now. I coached arena football, and then when they got into high school, What I did was I stopped doing the arena football because I want to coach my kids. And my son, my older son, who was a quarterback, ended up being named as a Naps High School All-American this year. His first
Uh-huh.
year, he was at a public school. My younger son, I was already homeschooling. He was playing at a place called Landmark Christian, where everybody respected each other. And my son, my older son, comes home after the third day of practice. He's like, Dad, number one, they're playing me at right tackle because one of the coach's sons is a quarterback or something, and they're playing him there. And my son at the time was like 5'8", 170 pounds, but he could throw the hell out of the ball. And he said, and then
Yeah.
he comes home, he's complaining about that. And then the next day he comes back and he says, Dad, the coaches F this, F that. He said the kids will get in
Yeah.
fights at practices, and we'll just surround them and let them fight to conclusion. And the coaches are just
Yeah.
sitting there laughing. So I pulled him and I put him on the high school team at Landmark Christian. And the thing I've noticed is this, and it may sound trite, but having them in a Christian environment just leads to people respecting each other because as a coach, you don't have to browbeat a kid to get him to do what you want to do. All you got to do is let that kid know that you care about him and that you love him. And I think a lot of high school football coaches and even college and pro coaches, this goes all the way up through. It's like I had Sam Weiss on yesterday, and Sam led the Bengals to the Super Bowl in 1988. But the players, when they talk about him, you can tell that they truly love that man. And the same thing when I've interviewed guys about that played for George Allen or Bear Bryant or even, God forbid, guys that played for Bobby Knight. I know people don't want to hear that, but Bum Phillips is the one that really comes to my mind. Everybody that played for Bum Phillips, every one
Yeah.
of them, you would think they were talking about their father when they talk about him. And I think people missed a big picture of what a football coach can bring to a young man, whether he's 30 years old or 15 years old, and the influence and impact they can have on their life.
Yeah, no doubt, Mike. I agree. They have a, I like that term, the father figure, especially in the high school level. And I've worked in both. I've coached both in public and then I coached at a Jesuit private Catholic school in Tacoma, Washington, a few years back at Bellarmine Prep. And it was just a difference of seriousness, a difference of they had to go to class. There wasn't a lot of enabling of bad behavior, and
Yeah.
but disciplined in a fair, and hoping that the kid would respond in a way that will help them in their life, so they don't continue to make these kinds of errors and mistakes. So, no, I agree. I think the coach has a tremendous influence at every level. And, Bob Devaney and Tom Osborne were my coaches at Nebraska, and you could tell that they just didn't care about the scoreboard. They cared about you as a player, and they did their best to help that player in all areas of their lives.
Yeah, and you want to explain how you came to play at Nebraska for Devaney and them? And I know I had Ron McDowell on the other day who played for them in the early 60s when Nebraska was rough. And Devaney really changed
Yeah.
the culture of that program and got them to where Osborne could turn it into one of the greatest programs in the history of college football. And when you look at that, you want to talk a little bit about how you got to Nebraska? Because I know you had to go to junior college route, wasn't it?
Yeah, I went to when I came. I was terrible as a football player the first year, and my junior and senior year, I matured some and I grew some, and I was real tall and lanky. But I had once, I think maybe Santa Barbara University sent me a letter out of high school that they might be interested in me, and then they don't even have a program anymore, a football program.
Yeah.
So I had very little interest. So I went to junior college and matured another 2 years. And I had good speed and quickness. And Coach Osborne, but my size, I was only about 240, something like that. But Coach Osborne in Nebraska were kind of going through a change of philosophies there, and they wanted to start getting some. They needed some bigger offensive linemen, so and they were going to change their offense to an I formation. So Coach Osborne came out to California, and it's the first time he'd ever been to California to recruit from California, because the mentality in Nebraska was you're never going to get a California kid here. It's too cold. They're too far away, et cetera, et cetera. And they did have a point, because when I went on my recruiting trip about 2 months before I ended up going there, I'll never forget landing at the Lincoln Airport and getting off the plane in January of 1969, getting off the plane in January, and I walked about 10 or 15, 20 feet from the plane, and my little California mustache was frozen. And it was, that's how cold it was. And I saw Coach Osborne. I was walking towards him and another assistant coach by him, and I just looked at him, and he could just read my mind. There's no way I'm coming here, man. It is too cold. I had a little California winter coat on. It was. I think they had to buy me a coat that weekend just to keep me from freezing. And
that's a recruiting violation. They'll be bringing that up. They'll be punishing them for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, or they borrowed one for me. But it was bad. And I remember getting on the plane 2 days later after a recruiting trip. I said, I like Coach Devaney. I like Coach Osborne, and the guys that showed me around. They showed me film of the stadium, how all the stadium was red. And I said, but there's no way I'm going there. It's too cold, And 1 month later, or about 3 weeks later, myself and my teammate Bob Terrio, we drove back to Lincoln, Nebraska, and entered it. And the ultimate, there was a couple of factors when I decided on Nebraska. I really wanted to go to USC because, I was a Southern California guy, and I really idolized Ron Yeri, who's a good friend of mine today. He played at Cerritos College, and then he went to USC, two-time All-American offensive lineman. And, I just watched him play, and I said, I want to go to USC like Ron. But they didn't give me too much of a look, so I said, well, that's okay. And Nebraska had USC on their schedule 2 years in a row. And I said, well, you know what? If I don't play with them, I'll play against them. So, resentment can be helpful in football. So,
yes, it can. And the first game you play, Nebraska plays USC.
Yeah, and you know what? I came back there, and I didn't start right off on the starting team. There was just there was so much changes. Culturally, I was going through a lot of change, being from LA to Lincoln, and just everything was so different. And it took me a while to get the program down and the plays and everything. But and another thing that has started that we're celebrating this year is the 50-year reunion of Husker Power, Boyd Epley, who was the creator of Husker Power at the University of Nebraska.
Yeah, he was the strength coach, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was the first strength coach at the University of Nebraska, and he started out as a volunteer. And the winter program in January of '69, they changed everything. Nebraska was coming off 2 6-4 records, and that would be okay for some schools, but it wasn't acceptable to the people in Nebraska and Coach Devaney. It wasn't. So they said, we're going to make it harder in the winter ball and toughen these guys up. So they did, man. The winter program was hard. It was very hard. There was a lot of drills and but weightlifting became more prominent in January of 1969. And from that point on, Nebraska dominated college football for the next 3 years, 2 or 3 years. We went 9-2 in '69, played in the Sun Bowl and beat Georgia 45-6, pretty bad. And I think we ended up like 7 or 8. But the next 2 years we were national champions. And the part of Husker Power and the weightlifting that we did, we were just bigger and stronger and faster than other schools that we were playing at that time.
Yeah, and
because
you talked about 1970. You guys won the national championship. What was that year like? It had to be crazy in Lincoln.
The fans of Nebraska, when we won the national championship, I was really happy as an individual and as a teammate, but I was really happy for the Nebraska fans because they were so loyal, and that's the main theme of that whole state is that football program. There's no professional teams there, and so the Nebraska football team, University of Nebraska football, is the major theme for the whole state. So they all rally behind it, and they were happy as heck. And I'll never forget that we had one blemish on our record that year. I think we were 11-0-1 or we were 12-0-1, and the one blemish was SC.
Yeah, that was a tie.
That was a tie, 21-21, second game of the season, and SC had just beaten Alabama really bad the week before they played us, and we went into the Coliseum, and they were heavily favored. I think we were ranked 9th, and they were ranked 3rd, but they were heavily favored. And, statistically, I think our stats were better than they had. We went ahead of them. We were ahead of them most of the game. And then we just had we had some turnovers that hurt us, and we missed a chip shot field goal at the end of the game to win it. So we were really disappointed with that. We really thought we could beat them, but it didn't happen. But from that point on, we kind of ran the rest of our schedule. Colorado was fairly tough. I think Colorado was competitive with us as we went through the schedule. Oklahoma came into Lincoln the last game of the season, and they were competitive. We ended up beating them 28-21, but they were tough. They were tough to beat. They had just changed their offense, I think, earlier that year to the wishbone or away from the wishbone or something. But so they had gotten better as the year went on. But then we went down to the Orange Bowl, and New Year's Day, 1971, we woke up as the number 3 team in the nation. Texas was number 1, and Ohio State was number 2. And back in those days, you only had 3 bowl games on January 1st. Now you got 3 every hour on.
Yeah.
I
think all they had back then was what, the Cotton, Rose, and Orange.
That's it. The Cotton Bowl was on first, and then the Rose Bowl, and then the Orange Bowl. So in the Cotton Bowl, it was Notre Dame, and Joe Theismann was the QB in Texas. And Texas had won it the year before. They were national champions. And all they had to do was beat Notre Dame, they were going to be national champions again. But Notre Dame upset them in the Cotton Bowl. So, excuse me. On the way to we're still in our hotel, and we hear the score of the Cotton Bowl. So we're automatically number 2 in the nation because we were 3. Texas is knocked out, so they're going down. So then we're on the way on the bus to the Orange Bowl in Miami, and they make an announcement that Jim Plunkett and the Stanford Indians upset Ohio State. And our bus went crazy because now we had to beat LSU, and we almost for sure we'd be named national champions. So that's the kind of motivation we had going into that game on that day, and we ended up beating them. It was a tough game. They weren't very big. They had a pretty good defense.
Tommy Casanova.
And they had a guy named Sage that was a defensive lineman, and they had a middle linebacker, I think, Mike Anderson.
Yeah, he was an All-American, I think.
Yeah, and so they were tough and they were quick, but we drove on them the first drive and went in there and scored a field goal or something, went ahead, and we went ahead 10-0, and then I think we kind of got a little, relaxed and think, well, we're just going to blow these guys out. Well, they hung in there, and they ended up taking the lead with about 8 minutes to go in the game, 12-10, and then they kicked off to us, and we drove 67 yards to win it 17-12. But even their last drive, they were driving on us. There was about a minute and a half, 2 minutes left. They were driving on us, and thankfully my buddy Bob Terrio, who we were both JC guys from California, intercepted the pass and closed them out. But we put a lot of pressure on our defense in that game because we had some turnovers and so forth. We had a great defense that year. We had a great offense too. But our defense, the black shirts, played lights out every game that year for us. So it really helped. But that's how we – so the paper – so all the reporters are saying, well, maybe Notre Dame should be number one. This was after the game because they beat Texas.
That still happens every time Notre Dame wins.
Yeah, good point. And Bob Devaney was an Irishman. He was very good with humor, and so when they asked him that night if Notre Dame should be number one, it was headlines in the Miami Herald the next day. Headlines on the sports page. Even the Pope could not vote Notre Dame number one. That was his quote. Even the Pope couldn't vote Notre Dame number one. So that got a lot of coverage. And but we won. I think they got maybe a couple votes, and we had all the other votes. And so it was a great ending to my last game of my career at Nebraska.
Yeah, it was also an ending to winning for a while too, Bob, because then you get drafted by the Chicago Bears. What was your take being drafted in the third round by the Bears?
Yeah, that was, the Bears. The Bears were really popular in Nebraska because they're so close to Illinois, and they had great players on the team, Dick Butkus and Gale Sayers, and just a legendary of players going all the way back to the 20s. And so, I was happy to be drafted and just to get an opportunity to play pro football, and went there. And that first year, that rookie year, and we were in Rensselaer, Indiana. You know where that's at?
Yes, I know where that's at.
Yeah. How far are you away from there, Mike?
I'm on the other side of the state. I'm actually down on the Indiana-Ohio border, close to Cincinnati, but I know where Rensselaer is.
Yeah, well, the Bears trained there for like 50 years, and it was a tough training camp, man. But that's when they filmed Brian's Song, that movie Brian's Song.
Yeah, love that movie.
The original one was that training camp my rookie year in '71, but the Bears were transitioning. They were world champions, NFL champions in 1963, and then from that point on, the organization, whatever, it just wasn't a good fit. And then in the 70s, it continued, and so I was there 5 years, and we never went 500 when I was there, and then I just had we had three different coaches. Jim Dooley, Abe Gibran, and Jack Pardee. And, I was the last coach, Jack Pardee. I think I was one of his guys initially. Then I took a hit on my thigh, and it put me out about a half a season. And when you're injured like that, you just fall behind. Coaches start making other plans. So, yeah. And so I did come back to training camp the next year, and I could see that politically it just wasn't the same, and I just decided I just asked them to release me, and I got picked up by the Seattle Seahawks, this expansion team in Seattle, and we had played Seattle when I was still with the Bears that exhibition season. We went out to Spokane, Washington, to play this new team, and in this Joe Albee Stadium in Spokane. And which is, Spokane's. I didn't even know anything about the Northwest geographically, but there's probably 15, 20,000 fans in the stadium. I can't remember exactly, but it was really a downscale compared to some of the NFL stadiums we have played in. So I didn't know if the Seahawks were going to play. This is their home stadium. But anyway, we ended up beating them, and we're on the plane going back to Chicago. And I'm thinking, things aren't real good here in Chicago. But, man, am I grateful I'm not with the Seattle Seahawks, because look at that mess. And that's the exact thought process I had. I go, you know what? Maybe I don't have it too bad. So 2 weeks later, my butt was on a plane to Seattle at night. And so, So anyway, that's how that happened.
So what was that like? An expansion team, I'm sure it was kind of a mess. They were a lot better shape at that point than Tampa Bay was. Jack Patera actually, got the Seahawks to a certain point where they were close to making the playoffs in the late 70s, early 80s. But what was it like going from an established team to an expansion team?
Well, it wasn't, let's put it this way, it wasn't part of my NFL goal. It wasn't, that's the only way I could put it. It wasn't my top of the list experience I wanted to do. Because I'd already battled for 5 years and we hadn't even busted 500 and, back in those days, it was the thought process, it's going to take expansion team years to get a winning team, Yeah. So I get there, and the first day they picked me up at Seattle University, where I stayed for a couple of weeks. They picked me up, bring me down to Kirkland, Washington, and we drove on to the training site, and it's on a lake, Lake Washington, the training facility. And I go, wow, this is beautiful, and these big, beautiful green trees, and and the big Lake Washington. I go, wow. And then they had this spanking brand new locker room, meeting room, administration building, brand new. And I go, wow. I walked through there, and they had a great weight room, and they gave me a tour of the place. And then I met the quarterback. They said, we want to introduce you to Jim Zorn. This is either the first or second day. So I knew Jim Zorn because he went to Cerritos College too, about 7 years after I did. 7 or 8, or maybe 5 or 7 years after I did. So I'm meeting Jim Zorn, and Jim goes, hey, Bob, do you remember me? I said, well, I know you played for Cerritos. He goes, no, do you remember you and Ron Yeri coming into the Cerritos College weightlifting room and basically taking the place over? And I was the paid weightlifting attendant, and I was supposed to keep you guys in order, and I didn't do a very good job or something like that. And I said, no, Jimmy, I don't remember that. I didn't remember that, but it was humorous, and we laughed about it. Because Ron and I would go in there once in a while and lift weights, because we were both alumni there, and But I thought that was funny. But anyway, it became a very exciting team to play for. We had Mike Curtis on that team that first 2 years. We had Bill Munson, great quarterback from the Lions. He passed off. Rest in peace. And then. So we had some ingredients. It had Norm Evans, who was a great Miami Dolphins tackle on that 72 team. Nick Bebout, who played with the Atlanta Falcons for years. And we had some ingredients of some older veterans. And that first year we won 3 games, but you could see that there was, and then I'll never forget the first day Largent came into our locker room. I remember because they picked it, there was 15 of us that the Seahawks picked up the last cut in 1976 of training camp. So we come in there, and then they cut 15 guys. So there was a lot. We didn't know each other very well. That first week, we were wearing we're getting ready for the opening game of the 1970 season, and we're wearing name tags on our helmets. So everybody knows who they're talking to. And Largent comes in to the locker room. I go, hey, who's this high school kid walking in here? I thought he was a high school kid because he looked so young, and he had this bushy blonde hair. But wow, man, did him and Jim Zorn have an impact on our offense immediately. We played the St. Louis Cardinals that first game, and we were driving on them to win the game at the end. I think we only lost by, 4, 5, 6 points, but we were driving and we ran out. The clock ran out. But Jerry Rome had a lot to do in getting Jerry Rome, who was from Tulsa University, Dallas Cowboys, had a lot to do getting Steve to the Seahawks because Jerry coached him at Tulsa. So he had to convince the brass at the Seahawks that Steve Largent would be worth it. But I tell you that he was a phenomenal player, Steve Largent, a great teammate, a hard worker, and he continued to amaze me every year that he played.
Yeah, and
the catches he made.
The thing I remember about that team, even with Largent, I had Efren Herrera on the show about a year and a half ago. But it was Jack Patera would try anything to win a game. I mean, you could see a fake punt or a fake field goal at any time from him because he was playing to win the game, even if he didn't have the talent the other team had.
You're right. He
made the game exciting, even though the team may not have been at the time.
He did. He was an innovating coach. He was, down to earth, and he was real businesslike. But he had some of these creative special team plays that every one of them I think were successful. And we had to use them at times because a lot of times we just couldn't match up. But one thing that Jack and a lot of us guys, when we get together for alumni functions, we always remember this, that one of Jack's favorite sayings to us when practice was over, not every day, but, maybe once a week, he goes, "Gentlemen, I will tolerate you till I can replace you." Okay? So we used to break practice like that, like, you're not getting a lot of security here, so you better keep working,
Yeah.
And
so the other thing that stood out to me was this. I mean, your offensive line coach in Seattle for part of that time was Howard Mudd, who I think is considered one of the great offensive line coaches in NFL history.
Yeah, he is. You bet he is. And I give him credit for extending my career another 5 years because I had a hard time pass blocking, and I had a lot of different line coaches, but he turned a lot of my bad habits, and he fixed them, feet work and so forth. And I don't have enough, words to how much I appreciated playing under Howard Mudd. But in '78, our offensive line was, we had Norm Evans at right tackle, myself at right guard. We had a kid named John Yarno who was was an All-American out of Idaho University. And Tom Lynch, who was a second-round draft pick from Boston College at left guard. And we had Nick Beepout, who was a 5 or 6 year veteran from the Atlanta Falcons. And Art Kuhn was another player, center that went back, was center and guard. But I think we were in the top 5 with allowed sacks and statistically. And 79, the offensive line had the same, but Howard Mudd just really helped get us together as one unit, and we could run the ball, and then we had a sprint out draw series that was very effective. We probably averaged 6 to 7 yards on that the whole year, and it really caused problems with the defense because we had Sherman Smith and David Sims, who led the NFL. David Sims led the NFL in '78 with touchdowns, and then Steve Largent. And Steve Largent was a threat against anybody. And Sam McCullum was another effective wide receiver we had. So we and then our defense kept coming along. So yeah, we went 9-7 in '78, the fastest winning expansion team in the history of the NFL. Probably would have made the playoffs in today's system.
Yeah, and the problem back then was you had to compete with a really good Denver Broncos team, the Oakland Raiders, the San Diego Chargers. It was not a weak division.
Kansas City was in that. I think it was the Western Division.
Yeah.
San Diego was always tough. We didn't beat San Diego, I don't think, until 1981. We finally beat them, but it was San Diego, Kansas City, Denver, Oakland, and Denver, I think.
Yeah, that year, 1978, Denver won the division at 10-6, and then the Raiders, Seahawks, Chargers were all 9-7.
Yeah. Well, it was a tough. You're right, Mike. It was a tough division, and pretty. But we were so inspired. In our third year, we got a winning team. And we came back in '79, and we went 9-7. And now I shredded my knee at the end of the season, so I missed the last couple of games of that season. But then we come back in 1980, and I think we were 4-3 after 7 games. We were 4-3, had a winning record at that time. Then we lost our last 9 games, and we went 4-10 that year. And we lost Sherman Smith. That hurt, but it was amazing. We were competitive in a lot of those games, but we were all in shock. And we had a hard time believing what happened. Because mid-season we were there at 4-3 just about, and so that was disappointing. And then 81. Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead.
Well, and then in '81, I think we were like 5-11 or something. So, '82, I was released, and then I think they replaced Jack mid-season of '82 with Mike McCormick, and then Mike. I don't know if Mike coached. He finished that year out. He might have coached '83, and then they brought in Chuck Knox.
Chuck was there in '83.
Who got him to the
that
playoffs.
was the team. Yeah, that was the team that went to the AFC Championship game.
That's right.
They upset the Miami Dolphins down in Miami. I think 24-20 or 27-20, and then they lost the AFC Championship game. And then the next year, I think they lost in Miami in the divisional playoffs. What led to your retirement or stop playing after the 1981 season? And then why did you play in the USFL?
Yeah, it's amazing. Norm Evans had a publication, and they started this new award, naming the Lineman of the Year award, and it was started in 1980, and I was chosen as the first Seahawk to receive that award in 1980, and I went from from that kind of high performance that year to 1982 to being cut from the Seahawks, and my only explanation is I had developed a severe problem with alcohol and other drugs, and each year it got worse. And when I hit my 30s, I just deteriorated more physically and mentally. And so, I was in '82 when I was in training camp, I was trying to practice hungover, and I'm 32 years old or 33, whatever I was, and it just really had an impact on my off-season training and my mental status, and I just deteriorated in a couple of years fairly fast. And so, the Seahawks they said we got to make a choice. And I was playing some exhibition seasons, and I was I'm my worst critic, and I know when I'm playing well, and if I'm on my if I'm getting the job done, and I could tell that I just couldn't get it done. And I felt I was probably only weighing 250. I should have been weighing 260, 265. So it's a combination of things that I think contributed to that. If I didn't have a drinking and drug problem, I still had major passion for football, and I still had all this experience. I probably could have played a couple, 2 or 3 more years. But the chemicals contributed to my downfall significantly.
Yeah. The USFL, what was that experience like with the Chicago Blitz?
Well, yeah, I started out with the Boston Breakers, and I'll never forget, we were down there. Orlando was our training camp. The New Jersey Generals were right next to us. We were on the same 2 football fields. The Generals were on one field, and the Breakers on the other. And I really liked going to the Breakers because I had a lot of Nebraska teammates there. Good friends. Tony Davis, who played for Tampa Bay, great player for Nebraska. Odious Lee, who was a defensive lineman for Nebraska, was a teammate there on the Breakers. And there was quite a few other – we had quite a few Nebraska players on that team. I can't remember all their names now, but, so that was nice because the USF had some kind of geographical draft where, if you lived in this certain area, you were the property or you were under the draft area of the Boston Breakers. So you had to play for the Breakers. I don't know how they did it identically, but I had to play for the Breakers because that was the arrangement they had in the USFL. And I loved it. I had Dick Corey as the head coach there. I thought he was a great head coach. He coached at Mater Dei High School here when I was in high school, very successful. Had a line coach named Keith Rowan who went on to coach in the NFL for a long time. So it was a great experience. But again, my alcoholism just kind of it continued to progress, and I'm late showing up for meetings, and I'm missing practice because I can't get out of bed. I'm too hungover. And so it just got bad. And Dick Corey finally called me in and said, I got to let you go, Bob, and you got a severe drinking problem, and you better get some help for it or you're going to end up on Skid Row. That's what he told me. And I just said, I go, what are you talking about? That would never happen. I got this under control. So about a month later, I get a call from the Blitz. George Allen wants me to come to Chicago, and because they had a couple guards that got hurt, and so I hadn't worked out or anything. So I went there, and I was there for about a month, Mike, and same thing. I tried to play in a game. I just did terrible, and I was done. I was done. So that's all. But I would have, if I would have been if I would have been healthy and sober, I would have continued with the USFL because it was an avenue to continue playing football and getting paid.
Yeah. So when did you finally realize you had a problem, and when did you take care of it?
I finally I admitted myself to a treatment center in Monroe, Washington on July 12th, 1983. And so it's been a while, about 35 years ago. And I had a great counselor in there that I really liked, and he and I connected. He had a great sense of humor. He made it okay to be an alcoholic, drug addict. I had it in my family. I came from a family of heavy drinkers, and, there's no doubt in my mind that there's a genetic predisposition to it. And so they taught me how to, Bob, there's another way you can live life, but you got to follow these recommendations. And I give gratitude to football because I don't think you can play football that long if you're not coachable. You need to be coachable. And I looked at my counselor and the other staff there like my coaches. And they're going to coach me how to be sober. And I followed their directions, and they were right. And then I ended up going into the counseling field 2 years later. Coach Osborne, when I got out of treatment, Coach Osborne said, look, I want you to come back here to Nebraska, continue your education. I didn't get my bachelor's degree when I was there as a player. And I went back there after 6 months of sobriety, and I re-entered school, and I coached for Coach Osborne as a graduate assistant with freshman offensive linemen. And yes, I was there 2.5 years working on my education, got that degree. Then I went back out to Seattle and worked for the treatment center I went through. And I was there about 5 or 6 years, and then I worked for some other treatment centers here and there, but stayed in that field. And then I ended up working for the Betty Ford Center here in the desert in Rancho Mirage. I came to work for them in January of 2001. And I was with them about 16 years in a variety. I was a director, a primary counselor, lead counselor. And then there was a transition they went Hazelden Treatment Center from Minnesota and the Betty Ford Center merged. And anyway, I kind of retired from them a couple of years ago. Now I'm working in a private clinic with Dr. Harry Harvatunian, who was a medical director at Betty Ford Center for the last several years. And we were friends, and he started this clinic up 2 or 3 years ago, and I've been working with him for the last 2 or 3 years, mostly on a part-time basis.
All right. Let's see. So we know what you're doing nowadays. What's your take on the Super Bowl coming up? Who do you like in that game?
I was a Los Angeles Rams fan for many years, Mike. But I know a lot of people hate the New England Patriots, but I don't hate them. I mean, they may be. I don't know about all the stuff, the cheating and all that. I know in the NFL, every team's trying to get the upper hand in some way or another.
You were never on a team that cheated, were you, Bob?
Huh?
You were never on a team that tried to cheat, did you?
Yeah. Well, you know what Howard Mudd, one of his favorite sayings was? He goes, "Win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat." So to say, look, hold that sucker, man, if you have to. Don't let him hit the quarterback.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, but I look at a team with their winning consistency at the highest level of the profession. They got to be doing something. Somebody's got to be doing something right in that organization.
Yeah.
And Brady is amazing. I would have loved to block for him, because I went to the Seattle New England Super Bowl game. What was it, 3 years ago?
Yeah, Super Bowl 49, I think it was.
Was it 49 there in Phoenix? And I was so impressed because Seattle had that. I think Seattle almost had that. They had it won. But the way Brady came onto the field and got the huddle set up, and you could tell those players that he was the only one speaking in that huddle. He really reminded me of a general commander, of that huddle. And then just his presence out there was significant in my point as a spectator that night. And so I just think the overall consistency of their winning, they're doing something right. And, their players, I see them playing as a real team consistently. I don't see Belichick. He doesn't tolerate a lot of individualism, it doesn't look like, And so I have a high respect for them. Very impressed with the Rams. I think, what's the coach's name?
Sean McVay.
The head coach. Yeah, I think Sean's done a great job. We got Nebraska players on both teams. Sue is on the Rams team, and then Burkhead is on the Patriots team. So I
love Burkhead. He was a Cincinnati Bengal, but Marvin Lewis decided never to use him in the 4 years he was here. Because Marvin Lewis
they didn't
is an
use
idiot.
him?
Oh, no. They let him start one game, the last game he ever played here, and he ran for like 130 yards. But it's Marvin Lewis.
The kid's tough.
Marvin Lewis is
he's tough. He runs vertically. He's not afraid of putting his head down. And he was a great player at Nebraska.
Yeah.
And
so
then
how far do you think Nebraska is for contending again with Scott Frost? Because last year they started off rough, but played a lot better the second half of the season.
Yeah, I don't think they're very far off at all, Mike. I think they're going to, I think this offseason is going to be a big accomplishments for them in the weight room and get them a little bit bigger and stronger, faster. I think they've had a real good recruiting season. I think Frott's a very brilliant young coach. He's got a brilliant offensive mind, and I like that quarterback Martinez. And their offensive line got better as the season went on. I thought they were. I mean, they played Ohio State real close until the end, and then. But I think their whole team improved as the time went on. I went back there, the Colorado game, the second game of the year. In fact, I got to sit with Coach Osborne in his box. He invites me back once a year, which I always really enjoy. But they missed their first game of the season with Akron State, and as a coach, a lot of those games are almost like practice games. You get you tuned up, fix things that you need to fix, and they called the game off because of thunder. So the game was never played, and I think that hurt them a little bit in the beginning. I remember the old days, we'd play in snowstorms, thunderstorms, rainstorms.
I'll tell you, Bob, today, my kids didn't none of the kids around at the schools we're at went to school because it was below zero. I remember having, back in my day, as they used to say, I remember I still had to get my ass up and go to school. And if the bus broke down, they'd just bring in more kids from somewhere.
Yeah, it's amazing, huh? It's definitely changed. Yeah, we play in rainstorms, mud. It didn't matter, but times have changed.
I don't like artificial turf. I want to see some mud. And the thing that really pisses me off is like the Kansas City-Indianapolis playoff game where the field's heated and they're shoveling the snow. We could have had a snow game. Instead, we got what we got.
Yeah. No,
I like
hear
snow
you.
and rain and mud. I remember in 1977, the Rams and Vikings playing in a mud bowl out in L.A.
Yep, I remember that. Yeah, I was still out here in high school. And I appreciate you interviewing guys like McDole and, Pat, some of those old Nebraska guys, McDole and Pat Fisher and Mick Tingelhoff. They were Bob Brown. They were all legendary players when I came back there as a young JC transfer, and I always tough players. They were tough people too. I mean, McDole played about 15 or 16 years, I think.
Yeah,
and,
he was a great player too. I mean, the bad thing about defensive players back then, until about 1978-79, there was no sack records. So
yeah.
I mean, I remember Coy Bacon, who played for the Bengals, had like 27.5 sacks in one season, but it was only counted by the team. The NFL didn't keep the stat.
When did they start recording those?
I think it was around 1978, 79, maybe 80, but right in that area.
Yeah, and then you had Deacon Jones, too. He was another figure that I don't think
Deacon was a bad man. Yeah, there's a lot of guys that are not in the Hall of Fame that should be, and they're not there just because that sack record wasn't kept. But, I mean, McDole still holds the record for most interceptions by a defensive lineman in a career, which I think he had 12 or 13.
Yeah, I think his nickname was the Dancing Bear, wasn't it?
Yes. Sonny Jurgensen gave him that name at a nightclub in Washington, D.C. in the early 70s.
No kidding. Well, he was a legend at Nebraska, as Pat Fisher, Bob Brown, all those guys. When I transferred there, they were just legendary figures. And, of course, Coach Devaney was the same. For helping turn that Nebraska program. They'd never been a real winning program before, I don't think, until '62.
No, because I know every team McDole played on was a losing team.
Yeah. But those fans, they hung in there, man. They hung in there. And Devaney he had the aptitude and the assets to get players to play for him. you know.
Yeah.
And Coach Osborne was.
Yeah, Coach Osborne is the perfect example of why Devaney was so good, because great coaches are usually not afraid to have great assistants. And he had a great assistant there. And I still think the 95 Cornhuskers were the greatest college football team I ever saw.
You know, I think so too. And one of the greatest games I've ever watched in my life. And so proud to be alum. Huh? No.
The 83 national championship game? Orange Bowl?
Well, that game was hurtful. I mean, they had some great players.
It was hurtful, but what it was to me was Tom Osborne showed me how great a coach he was there by going for two. He went for the win.
Bet.
And there's too many guys that are afraid to go for the win.
Yeah, well, you remember, this is way before your time, in 1966 when Michigan State and Notre Dame tied for it. I think it was it Ira Persegin that was criticized?
Yeah, Ira Persegin was the coach. It was 10-10. I've interviewed Terry Hanratty, who was the quarterback in that game, and he says what people forget is there was only like 40 seconds left, and we were on our own 15 or 20 yard line. So he said it made sense to him not to go for it. Now it doesn't to me, because I think you always go for the win, because a tie is a loss. You either win or you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Coach Osborne, I wasn't surprised at all, man. Not at all, because I know him. He's one of the hardest working coaches I'd ever seen in my life, and just a great example of integrity and hard work. But getting back to the 95 team, that's the luxury of Nebraska. There's always kind of a humorous comparison between the 1971 team and the 1995 Nebraska team, because they were both phenomenal undefeated teams that just, they've both been named, the best college teams ever, So there's always a little chuckle between the alumni. But the game that I'm most proud of was Coach Osborne's first national championship, when Nebraska went down to the Orange Bowl again and had to beat the University of Miami in there.
Yeah.
And I think that was their 94 team, Mike.
Yeah, it was.
That did that.
Yeah, because they won back-to-back.
That was Coach Osborne's. Yeah, they won it back-to-back. They could have won 4 in a row, I think, very closely. That 96 team kind of, down again.
I think that was against Florida State. Team that lost to Florida State on the missed field goal.
Yeah. They could have had 4 in a row, but Coach Osborne had he'd won Big 8 championships, Coach of the Year, but he still hadn't won that national championship. In that 94 team went down there and beat Miami, which was very hard. And it was, I can't remember the exact score, but it was like 35 to, I don't know, but it was close. And, I was very, very proud to be a Husker that night, and Coach Osborne getting that first national championship.
Yeah, and
some
that
great
was
players.
A Miami team that was ranked 3rd in the nation. They beat them 24-17 at Miami. Who did that Miami team have?
24-7.
Yeah, because I know Dennis Erickson was the head coach. Their only loss that year was against Washington at home, which snapped that long winning streak they had at home. I think that was Ryan Clement. Clement was a freshman. I think Frank Costa was the quarterback, which not a great quarterback. But that was a great defense, because they had Ray Lewis, Kenny Holmes, Tremaine Mack, who was drafted pretty high, Warren Sapp. So you had 2 basically NFL Hall of Famers on that defense that Nebraska beat, and they beat them in Miami. And I think that Miami was like 62-1 over their previous 63 games at the Orange Bowl going into that game.
Yeah. Yeah, that was always the challenge. Is Nebraska always had to go to Miami to play in this Orange Bowl, where a lot of these, schools were right from the state of Florida, and it was kind of a little time home advantage. But that offensive line, that's where they got the nickname the pipeline. And their coach, Milt Tenneper, rest in peace. He died a few years ago, but he built those offensive lines in that area that just dominated the line of scrimmage for several years. And so that's where that pipeline, Coach Tenneper wrote a book on it, and it's a very interesting read. So phenomenal program over the years. We've been very disappointed the last, 15 years, ever since Frank Solich has been gone. It's been pretty down, a few sparks here and there. But I still think we're the winningest program in the last 50 years, even with the last 15 years of what's going on.
Yeah, you got to be up there. I know that. Nebraska is one of the greatest programs of all time. All right, we're a little over an hour. I told you we'd make sure it wouldn't go longer than this. But, Bob,
okay.
I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure, and let's stay in touch.
All right, most definitely. If you want, just hold on here. I'll wrap this up, and then we'll talk for a minute off air.
Okay.
All right. Guys, I want to remind you, this is Super Bowl week at the Grueling Truth. Tomorrow on Survive and Advance with myself and Steve Risley. Bob, have you ever heard of Steve Risley?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. He played on the Indiana Hoosiers 1981 National Championship team. He has a huge ego, and I like to bring him down as much as I can. So I like to always ask people if they've ever heard of Steve Risley. But he played college basketball, which right there is kind of a soft sport, running around in shorts and tank tops and playing in heated gyms and stuff like that. So I just wanted to see if you'd ever heard of him. But me and Steve Risley tomorrow will welcome former Pittsburgh Steeler linebacker Levon Kirkland to the show to talk about Super Bowl 30. On Friday, our guest on Survive and Advance will be Rocky Bleier, who will be on to talk about his 4 Super Bowls with the legendary Pittsburgh Steelers. And tonight, after the Indiana basketball game against Rutgers, we will have myself, Steve Risley, and Colin Hartman, who played on last year's Indiana Hoosier team, on to do the post-game for the Indiana-Rutgers game. So, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to remind everybody you can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. And I can tell you this, Bob, right now I am getting a text message from Steve Risley, so this should be good. But he said, hey, thanks for the play. Any publicity is great. So there you go. So you can hear me and Steve every Monday through Friday at noon. Remember, Levon Kirkland tomorrow, Rocky Bleier on Friday. You can hear all those shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you hear sports podcasts. You'll find the Grueling Truth. So for Bob Newton, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to the Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.